I'm Elaine Reyes, and this is America's Now. Tonight, saying yes to no, how a 1988 ad campaign in Chile convinced people to vote no to a dictator's rule has turned into a highly acclaimed Oscar-nominated film. Can the power of positivity change the course of an election? Back in August, correspondent Brian Byrne sat down with both the actors and the real-life people who inspired the film.
We know perfectly well that in that moment we had the opportunity to defeat a dictatorship by pacific means, with a vote, with a pencil and paper. And it was extraordinarily important for everything that's happened after that, till now. It was really an historic opportunity for us and for the country and for the people of Chile.
Then Latin Spring. Laura Carlson tells us how Latin American students have been taking to the streets in droves in an effort to encourage their governments to institute reform.
From Chile to Mexico, youth uprisings are protesting lack of access to quality education, economic systems that benefit the few, and political systems that ignore their needs.
And finally, the big business of quinoa. Known as the miracle grain of the Andes, this ancient supercrop is changing and improving the diet of people around the globe. For centuries, quinoa was also a healthy, inexpensive food source of the indigenous people in the region. But now the worldwide demand and skyrocketing price of quinoa has forced them to change their diets in a dramatic and often unhealthy way.
10 years ago, they had only an Andean diet in front of them, and it was not something that they have any possibility to choose. Now they have, and now they want rice, they want noodles, they want candies, they want Coke, they want everything. They have occidentalized their diet because they have more profits, they have more incomes.
First up, Hollywood has announced its annual Academy Award nominations for 2012. Among the big honorees, several films based on real-life political events. Lincoln, nominated for 12 Academy Awards, portrays the legendary American president who led the way to passing the amendment that abolished slavery in the 1860s. Argo tells the story of a CIA operative who concocted a creative scheme to free U.S. hostages held in 1979 Iran. And along similar lines, nominated for Best Foreign Film is the Chilean movie No. It's the story of an unusual ad campaign used to unseat the president of Chile in 1988. Correspondent Brian Byrne sat down with both the star and the director of No, which is the country's first film to ever be nominated for the Oscar.
The highly lauded Mexican actor Gael Garcia Bernal says he chose to star in the Chilean film No because he thinks the events depicted in it are as important now as they were when they happened a quarter-century ago.
Not only a landmark for Chilean life nowadays, but also for the world, the entire world, because it was the first time that the dictator was overthrown by democratic means.
The democratic means was a referendum vote called by Chilean dictator Augusto Pinochet in 1988 in response to growing displeasure with his regime both at home and abroad. A yes vote supported the strongman. A no vote would send him packing. Rather than attack the tyrant, who was accused of human rights abuses, the opposition chose to wage a positive campaign that focused on the potential in Chile's future. Garcia Bernal plays René Saavedra, a brash young ad man who helps create the colorful logo, upbeat jingles, and peppy TV spots that ultimately made the No campaign a success. It was a style of political marketing that had never existed in the region before.
And this was the first time that in Latin America it was tried out. You know, in 1988 it was like the beginning of doing a campaign, and actually they came and they succeeded without let's say structural support. They were the antagonists of the story, you know, and they were working with something that was negative, which was a no, rather than a yes, you know. They didn't have a candidate, no, right. Which is plays a big. It was a big. It was a rally around. It wasn't a person. It was an idea. Exactly, it was an idea, and so it was incredibly difficult. And I think they managed to pull out an incredible story.
A story whose roots date back to 1973, when Chile's history was changed forever. This is the La Moneda Presidential Palace in Santiago. It was here on September 11th, 1973, that General Augusto Pinochet led a violent coup that left then-President Salvador Allende dead and swept Pinochet into power. The Pinochet dictatorship ruled unrivaled for 15 years until the 1988 referendum vote depicted in the film No swept him out of La Moneda. Even now, 24 years after that historic vote, the legacy of the Pinochet era continues to loom large over Chilean society. Pinochet's regime tortured and murdered thousands of Chileans, yet he retained wide support.
A lot of people know how Pinochet got in power, but nobody knows how he got out.
Director Pablo Larraín says he wanted to examine his country's recent past and accurately portray just how divisive the referendum vote was at the time.
Yes got almost 43%, which is a lot. And today I would say that most people wouldn't do it, wouldn't vote again, because we knew what happened, who these people really were after, the referendum, when democracy came back, and then we start to open files and see exactly what happened. And I think Pinochet is considered today by most people as someone who is really a bastard, and it's somebody that you don't want to have close in any way.
Garcia Bernal's character is a composite of two men, Eugenio Garcia and Jose Manuel Salcedo. Garcia had studied philosophy, but was working in advertising when he was recruited as the campaign's creative director.
Durante el gobierno de Pinochet, la mayoría de los intelectuales o la gente que no concordaba con él tuvo que buscar pegas alternativas, trabajos alternativos, como por ejemplo trabajar en publicidad, ¿no? Y eso hizo que se juntara un grupo de gente muy talentosa detrás de esta campaña, que eran todos opositores, por supuesto, al régimen.
Salcedo was an actor who often had to perform underground for fear of military harassment. He spent hours with Garcia Bernal to help the actor understand the often dangerous conditions in which they had worked during the No movement.
We know perfectly well that in that moment we had the opportunity to defeat a dictatorship by pacific means, with a vote, with a pencil and paper. And this was extraordinarily important for everything that's happened after that, till now. So it was really an historic opportunity for us and for the country and for the people of Chile.
La alegría ya viene.
No received critical acclaim at the Cannes Film Festival, which led to several international distribution deals. The attention meant that anticipation for the film in Chile was extraordinarily high. At the Santiago premiere in late July, 3 of Chile's ex-presidents were in attendance, including 93-year-old Patricio Aylwin, the man who succeeded Pinochet. The night before the premiere, producers scheduled a private screening for university students who themselves have been making world headlines recently. Over the past 2 years, students in Chile have staged noisy, often violent protests demanding reforms to the country's education system, a system that's been in place since the Pinochet era. The filmmakers of No and the students themselves say they see many parallels between today's calls for change and those depicted in the film. 24-year-old art student Paula González was born the same year as the Pinochet referendum.
Por ejemplo, en mi familia, la mitad votaba como por el sí y la otra mitad por el no. Entonces, como que en ese momento se formó como una gran pelea más que nada familiar y entre como igual amistad y todo eso, porque cada uno tenía como su punto de vista y y como realidades distintas, porque algunos sufrieron, otros no les importaba, otros se vieron beneficiados como por el golpe.
Porque pienso que es algo muy relevante para tanto como estudiantes, en el caso de nosotros, para comprender la historia de manera más completa. O sea, son procesos de Chile que usualmente tampoco se tratan de manera muy abierta, por ejemplo, en los libros educacionales, como pensamiento de país, nunca se ha tratado de manera muy particular y muy fuerte. Entonces, claramente esto ayuda a clarificar eso.
Este plebiscito está perdido desde el momento en que la derecha fascista lo convocó.
The movie meshes actual archive footage from 1988 with new dramatic scenes shot on rebuilt U-matic cameras imported from the United States. The low-quality image purposely blurs the line between reality and fantasy, old and new.
It's very risky somehow, you know, to have a very big production, have a Gael Garcia and everybody, and then you have, you know, I don't know, you have 1,000 people in the street, everything is... you know, the costume, the lighting, the cars, everything is set up, and then you bring a tube camera that is a $200 camera, you know, that nobody cares about it, and it's like shooting with a phone, you know, or a very low quality video. But the look of it is not possible to create it in post-production. You know, when you say, no, you pick the HD and then you do some post-production, no, it's not the same. It would never look the same.
Antes que nada, quería mencionarle.
As a Mexican actor appearing in a Chilean film dealing with a highly sensitive historical topic, Garcia Bernal says he knew his performance would be scrutinized.
Were you apprehensive about jumping into that, especially since you're not Chilean?
Actually, no, I wasn't. I wasn't worried about that because, also, I mean, in a way, my upbringing wasn't so alienated to what happened here. I mean, I grew up in Mexico in 1988. There was a big fraud in the elections, and therefore, I mean, the first time I voted, for example, was the first time that another party other than the PRI won in Mexico City. And the first time in my generation voted was the first time that the PRI was out of power in Mexico. So so in a way I also want to exercise my freedom all the time, you know, and I want to speak out and I want to be part of this, and I'm not apprehensive at all about it. On the contrary, I mean, if there is a sense of apprehension that somebody warns me about it, I go into it. Yeah, I want to do it even more.
The result is a performance and a film that will likely continue to get accolades as it is seen around the world, educating new generations about Chile's bloody past and the brilliant tactics used to usher in its brighter future.
That was Brian Burns reporting from Santiago, Chile. General Augusto Pinochet officially handed over presidential power in 1990. In 1998, he was indicted by a Spanish judge on human rights abuses, then arrested in England. He eventually returned to Chile and faced charges there, but was never convicted of any crime. He died in 2006. As Brian Burns' report mentioned, Chile's current education system is the same one that was put in place back when Augusto Pinochet was still in power. Before Pinochet, schools were free. Now they are for-profit and privatized, and many can only afford what some consider a subpar education. It's been the cause of much protest in Chile and throughout the region in the past 2 years. Laura Carlson has more in her view of the Americas.
Over the past year or so, students in Latin America have taken to the streets in a surprising wave of demonstrations. They haven't toppled governments like the Arab Spring, but their voices are changing politics in countries throughout the hemisphere. These new student movements have different demands, depending on the national context, but there is a common thread. Young people are saying that the society handed down to them is unfair, and they don't like the future it offers. From Chile to Mexico, youth uprisings are protesting lack of access to quality education, economic systems that benefit the few, and political systems that ignore their needs. Chilean students started the wave in May 2011 with protests against student debt and the deterioration of public schools. They call for restoring quality education, especially at the university level, more government investment in schools, and lower tuitions. Next, some 600,000 Colombian students held demonstrations against a government-proposed education reform. Joined by teachers and others, they scored their first victory by forcing the Santos government to withdraw the measure. Mexico joined the youth rebellions with the unexpected birth of the I Am 132 movement. A video of 131 students showing their university credentials and proclaiming their opposition to Mexico's former ruling party went viral last May, leading to an overnight movement of young people claiming to be number 132. The movement opposed the return of the PRI, the party that governed for 71 years in the July presidential elections. Mexico's youth also called for laws to break down the media monopoly that strongly supported the PRI and exercises near total control of the airways. It's logical that the new student movements point a finger at the media. They're the children of mass media like no other generation before. They recognize that control over information and ideas undermines their democracy and the power of critical thinking. The youth movements are using social media to fight back against commercial media. They organize marches on Facebook and Twitter. They're also coming up with creative forms of protest, from explaining their media demands to train commuters with cardboard boxes like televisions on their heads, to projecting three-story images on buildings during demonstrations. Unfortunately, in the last few months, governments have been responding with repression. In all three countries, students have been attacked and imprisoned. With the hatred of hypocrisy that so often characterizes the young, these students are seeing huge contradictions in societies that espouse democracy but allow enormous concentrations of economic, political, and media power. Youth have every right to make demands on their elders. They have to live in the world we eventually leave behind. In developing countries that face major challenges to maintain democratic ideals and reduce inequality that narrows their opportunities, these student movements are a breath of fresh air. For America's Now, I'm Laura Carlson.
We'd love to hear from you about this commentary and all America's Now stories. Please write to us at an@cctv-america.com. Or you could send us a tweet. Our handle is @CCTV America's Now. When America's Now returns, an ancient grain from Bolivia that is making its way around the globe. Quinoa has been a fixture in the diet of the people of the Andes for centuries. The seed is gram for gram one of the most nutritious foods in the world. Once it was only found in specialty health food shops. But the demand for the grain has since mushroomed, encouraging more stores to carry it in the United States, Europe, China, and Japan after its exceptional nutrient values were discovered. America's Now contributing correspondent Dan Collins reports on the impact this is having in Bolivia and Peru, where the superfood is grown.
Illuminated in the golden glow of the Andean sun, a field of quinoa ready for harvest. In Bolivia, much quinoa is still harvested by hand. These images conjure up a pastoral idyll of Andean farmers living as they have for millennia in harmony with Mother Nature. But the golden grain of the Andes is nowadays big, big business.
Antes esta comida solo nosotros comíamos, era de los indios, de nosotros, y no así la gente citadina, pero hoy es alimento de todas las bolivianas y bolivianos, inclusive apetecido por el mundo. Es un alimento muy importante en términos nutritivos, ¿no? Porque tiene casi todos los minerales, las vitaminas, los aminoácidos, y una de ellas, la más importante, la lisina, la que no permite el desarrollo integral de las células del cerebro y es un tema fundamental en la alimentación. Hace 3 años atrás nuestra exportación estaba sobre 8.000 toneladas, pero hoy podemos decir que sí esto ha aumentado aproximadamente a 26.000 toneladas, con lo que se genera alrededor de $85 millones para el país y para los productores.
It's not just production that has tripled, so has the price, which is a big incentive to grow the crop. A few hours from Bolivia's de facto capital, La Paz, near the shores of Lake Titicaca, this village is cashing in on the quinoa boom. In La Caya, it's become something to celebrate. When these men were children, quinoa is what helped them combat malnourishment and poor living conditions. But it was never a profitable crop, says farmer Petrona Urici. Now it is.
La quinoa este año hemos visto que ha subido. Antes era barato, el quinoa arroba era 20 bolivianas. Ahora que estamos vendiendo más de 100 bolivianas, 150.
With the quinoa plants recently sown, there's still much to learn about organic production and also how to boost their yield to satisfy the eager market.
This is one of the most ancient crops to be grown in the Andes. It's been eaten in communities like this for thousands of years. But the fantastic thing about quinoa is it can be grown in the most unforgiving of places, which makes it an important food security crop for the future.
That's why quinoa is finally getting the recognition many here believe is long overdue. 2013 marks its international year, with special recognition from the United Nations.
Nuestra apuesta es universalizar el consumo de la quinoa. Y para eso tenemos que trabajar, ¿no? Tanto en aumentar la cantidad de producción, en superficies, en volúmenes, el tema de la industrialización, la comercialización, y fundamentalmente lo que creemos que va a ser importante es de que podamos incorporar la quinoa en los diversos alimentos de la población.
But as external demand has tripled its value, are Bolivian quinoa producers still eating this ancestral crop? I asked Paula Mejia of Bolivia's Chamber of Commerce for quinoa.
10 years ago, they had only an Andean diet in front of them, and it was not something that they have any possibility to choose. Now they have, and now they want rice, they want noodles, they want candies, they want Coke, they want everything. They have occidentalized their diet because they have more profits, they have more incomes.
As the middle class grows, diets are becoming more westernized. Quinoa is having to appeal to new tastes. Everything from canapes to hamburgers to breakfast cereals. Quinoa will have to adapt if it is to compete with imported processed foods. It's ironic, but as the world benefits from the protein and mineral-packed punch of quinoa, its historic producers and consumers may be turning their back on the grain and spending their profits on junk food.
Don't forget that here in Bolivia, for a long time, for example, Andean products were for poor people. And that's something that we have to demystify, because Andean products are very, very strong products, very healthy products. That's why these people really overcame the weather, bad conditions, and no access, no electricity, no water sometimes. I mean, so we have to change that from their minds. Do you understand me? They need to understand that Andean food is not for poor people, it's for strong people.
Like Bolivia, Peru is also promoting domestic consumption of quinoa to combat malnutrition. Here at the Casa de los Petizos children's home, quinoa, apple and cinnamon punch is on the menu, part of a government program to promote healthy breakfasts. Nationally, 16% of Peruvian children under the age of 5 are chronically malnourished. That figure shoots up to more than 40% in some rural areas. Juan Reineck is the Peruvian Vice Minister for Agriculture.
Lamentablemente, los sectores populares muchas veces no tienen acceso a productos que más bien entienden que van encareciéndose, y esto es un poco lo que tenemos que evitar en la medida de que tenemos que producir mejor, tenemos que producir más, tenemos que hacer una campaña de ver cómo nutrir a estas maravillosas criaturas, y ojalá que esto que se está haciendo en Lima con mucha fuerza podamos hacerlo en provincias también, donde el sector rural es más importante que nada.
It's something Peru's First Lady, Nadine Heredia, has been combating. With a special focus on the rights of the child, she promotes the Andean diet with quinoa as its key component, questioning that impulse of mothers and grandmothers to buy imported foodstuffs when the cheapest and most nutritious option is at their fingertips. Quinoa's adaptability and resilience make it an ideal food security crop. And it's so nutritious, NASA chose it as food for astronauts on space missions.
Aquí podemos observar, por ejemplo, el contenido de sapone. Fíjense la espuma.
Here, in the mountains of Cusco, agronomists continue to discover the multiple properties and varieties of this crop. Not only is it packed with essential amino acids, vitamins and minerals, but it can also be used as an organic detergent. Saponin, the seed's bitter outer coating, which is washed off before eating, is still used in remote areas to clean clothes and as a disinfectant. The qualities of this humble seed continue to surprise and delight. The question now is whether production can satisfy the growing demand for export, as well as combating malnutrition at home. Quinoa is being called the Andes' gift to the world. Can it also rescue the people of these mountains from centuries of inadequate nutrition?
Our thanks to Dan Collins for that report from Bolivia. For its nutritional value, the ancient quinoa has become a gluten-free favorite among vegetarians and health-conscious eaters around the globe. As Dan Collins mentioned in his report, its success has not only helped people's diets, it has tripled the cost of the mighty grain from $3 in 2006 to $20 today for a 12-pound sack. But for the people living in some of the poor villages of Peru and Bolivia, the rise of the protein-rich grain has come with an unhealthy price tag. As the niche market has grown, quinoa has become too expensive for many of them to buy it. As a result, many of the villagers in both Peru and Bolivia who have lived off quinoa for centuries are turning to cheaper, often less nutritional foods imported from the West. A gut-busting menu of items that includes rice, noodles, candies, and sugary soft drinks like Coca-Cola. Next week on America's Now, Michael Voss introduces us to legendary Cuban jazz singer Omar Portuondo.
Omar Portuondo, the only female member of the original Buena Vista band. Some of the musicians were rediscovered and brought out of retirement, but Omar, who started in show business in the 1940s, has never been out of the limelight since then.
That's next week on America's Now. That brings us to the conclusion of our broadcast this week. You can find us on the web at cctv-america.com. And you can also find us on Facebook at cctvamerica.com. Please join us again next week for another edition of America's Now. See you then. Hollywood has announced its annual Academy Award nominations for 2012. Among the big honorees, several films based on real-life political events. Lincoln, nominated for 12 Academy Awards, portrays the legendary American president who led the way to passing the amendment that abolished slavery in the 1860s. Argo tells the story of a CIA operative who concocted a creative scheme to free U.S. hostages held in 1979 Iran. And along similar lines, nominated for Best Foreign Film is the Chilean movie No. It's the story of an unusual ad campaign used to unseat the president of Chile in 1988. Correspondent Brian Burns sat down with both the star and the director of No, which is the country's first film to ever. Known as the miracle grain of the Andes, this ancient supercrop is changing and improving the diet of people around the globe. For centuries, quinoa was also a healthy, inexpensive food source of the indigenous people in the region. But now the worldwide demand and skyrocketing price of quinoa has forced them to change their diets in a dramatic and often unhealthy way.
10 years ago, they had only an Andean diet in front of them, and it was not something that they have any possibility to choose. Now they have, and now they want rice, they want noodles, they want candies, they want Coke, they want everything. They have occidentalized their diet because they have more profits, they have more incomes.
First up,
with a vote with a pencil and paper. And it was extraordinarily important for everything that's happened after that, till now. So it was really an historic opportunity for us and for the country and for the people of Chile.
Then Latin Spring. Laura Carlson tells us how Latin American students have been taking to the streets in droves in an effort to encourage their governments to institute reform.
From Chile to Mexico, youth uprisings are protesting lack of access to quality education, economic systems that benefit the few, and political systems that ignore their needs.
And finally, the big business of quinoa. No. I'm Elaine Reyes, and this is America's Now. Tonight, saying yes to no, how a 1988 ad campaign in Chile convinced people to vote no to a dictator's rule has turned into a highly acclaimed Oscar-nominated film. Can the power of positivity change the course of an election? Back in August, correspondent Brian Burns sat down with both the actors and the real-life people who inspired the film.
We know perfectly well that in that moment we had the opportunity to defeat a dictatorship by pacific means.
Never be nominated for the Oscar.
The highly lauded Mexican actor Gael Garcia Bernal says he chose to star in the Chilean film No because he thinks the events depicted in it are as important now as they were when they happened a quarter-century ago.
Not only a landmark for Chilean life nowadays, but also for the world, the entire world, because it was the first time that a dictator was overthrown by democratic means.
The democratic means was a referendum vote called by Chilean dictator Augusto Pinochet in 1988 in response to growing displeasure with his regime both at home and abroad. A yes vote supported the strongman, a no vote